recorded this. Hello, everyone. Welcome again for another quick little informational session for you. Today, we want to talk about hybrid long-term care insurance. So since you know I'm not going to do a big, long introduction, I'm going to throw this right to Ben Bell, my great partner with Bright House. He's going to tell you a little bit about himself, and then we're going to jump right in.
Thank you, Randy. Hello, everybody. My name is Ben Bell. I work with Bright House Financial. I have been a life and long-term care specialist for the past 12 plus years, and I currently support the Chicago marketplace. Hopefully we can help answer some long-term care questions here.
Excellent. Let's jump right in. All right, let's start with the basics. Ben, what is hybrid long-term care insurance?
Good question. I think the easiest way to look at that is kind of comparing the hybrid or asset-based plans to the former traditional plans that a lot of people might be familiar with. And the analogy I use on that is kind of from traditional to hybrid. It's kind of like renting versus owning coverage. With the traditional plans that people might be familiar with, that their parents may have had something along those lines, it's kind of like renting coverage where you have a low cost to get in up front. You pay a premium every single month, similar to renting. And typically speaking, that premium will go up over time. If you don't have a long-term care event in that type of situation, there is no asset behind it. So if you pass away, that money is kind of gone, similar to renting. You don't have an asset like a home to pass on to the next generation. On the flip side of that coin, the hybrid plans or the asset-based plans are more like owning your coverage. In that type of situation, you either pay kind of all of the money up front or you pay a set amount of premiums into the plan that are guaranteed. And then from there, you have long-term care benefits. But if you're in a situation where you ultimately don't need that, there is a death benefit or asset behind that that passes on to your beneficiaries should you not need a long-term care event. So again, just kind of renting versus owning is kind of the difference between those traditional plans versus a hybrid plan.
Okay, so a lot of people have life insurance, they have annuities of some way, shape, or form. How does this kind of a policy fit in, and how does it combine with those kind of policies?
Yeah, so with a hybrid plan, it does have three components. And so the three components of a hybrid plan are a cash value. So there is an inherent cash value that you could walk away with. It has a death benefit. So again, if you don't use it, the death benefit passes on to your beneficiaries. And then it has a long-term care component to the plan. Typically speaking, what you're going to see is the cash value on these plans is usually 70 to 75 cents on the dollar of every dollar you put into the plan. The benefit is usually a dollar to $1.25 of every dollar you put into the plan. So it's kind of a principal protection death benefit. And then you typically get a multiplier for long-term care. So you're usually looking at somewhere between 2 and 6 times your money for the purposes of long-term care. And then in a lot of scenarios, those benefits can continue to grow over time.
All right, so what are really the key advantages? You mentioned the traditional policy, and we've just talked about other kind of insurances. What are the real advantages of going with a hybrid policy like this?
Yeah, so the kind of four key advantages I look at with hybrid plans or why most people kind of lean that direction. I kind of mentioned it previously, but the first is leverage. So you do get a multiplier on your money. So day one, you're typically getting somewhere again 2 to 6 times your money. And then from there, you're able to grow that money to keep up with the rising cost of inflation. The second thing, again, is the tax benefits. So in that scenario, the benefits function very similar to a Roth IRA. If you're familiar with that, the benefits grow tax-free and all of the benefits pay out on a tax-free basis. So you get some nice tax benefits with the plan. The third component that I think is appealing to a lot of people is it doesn't have that use it or lose it mentality, right? So 70% of people will have some form of long-term care in their life. If you're one of the lucky 30% of people that don't have a long-term care event, your money passes on to the next generation, your spouse, kids, or whoever you choose, as a nice tax-free death benefit. And then the last component is typically the fixed cost. So you know kind of going into it what your exposure is from a premium perspective. So you know exactly how much it's going to cost you in total premium.
All right, so we talked about the premiums, talked about a couple of those things. Tell me a little bit about how the actual benefits work with these policies.
Yeah, so for long-term care plans, like from a benefit perspective, they're very similar in the way they get triggered or how you actually access your benefits. And the triggers are kind of twofold. So your doctor basically certifies that you have a cognitive impairment. So let's think Alzheimer's, dementia, traumatic brain injury, or you have trouble with the activities of daily living. Think about things like getting in and out of bed, eating, bathing, things of that nature. If your doctor certifies that you're having issues with either side of that kind of equation, your benefits will then start. The other thing I mentioned on benefits from a long-term care perspective is there's two ways they can pay out in the industry. One is a reimbursement plan, one is an indemnity plan. And just a quick breakdown of that, when you're looking at a reimbursement plan, the way that works is you as the client pay out of pocket, you keep track of receipts, and you file a claim form every month, and then you get reimbursed for qualified medical expenses. With an indemnity plan, you're basically eligible for the full benefit each and every month, no receipts needed, and you file one claim form a year. So there's a little bit of a difference in the payout structure of a reimbursement plan versus an indemnity plan. But both plans, again, just to reiterate, will pay out completely tax-free on a monthly basis to the client.
Okay, so now we know how to get the money out. How do we get the money in? What are really the options on how to fund these policies?
Yeah, so from a funding perspective, what we typically see is the policies are going to be funded with after tax or non-qualified dollars. So just kind of think about, again, a Roth IRA in that sense, you're funding it with money that you've already paid taxes on in most scenarios. The other alternative funding options, which we sometimes see, is people repurposing an old cash value life insurance policy or an old annuity. And so if you have an old cash value life insurance policy and an old annuity and your needs have maybe changed, what some people do is they do what's called a 1035 exchange. Effectively, that's just a tax-free rollover from your existing plan into a new plan that has long-term care benefits. So yeah, most of them again funded with non-qualified dollars. Most of them are funded as a single deposit, but we do see some people being able to fund it over a 5 to 10 year period as well. And again, like I said, with the kind of home ownership analogy, what you'll see in those scenarios is those premiums are set and fixed, right? So you're going to know with certainty what your 5 or 10 premiums would be going into it.
I was just about to ask you that. So, all right. So, who is the ideal person for a hybrid long-term care policy? Maybe what does it look like? What kind of age? What's really the best person to look for a product like this?
Yeah, so that's a little bit of a tricky question because everybody's scenarios are a little bit different, right? So in general, what we typically see is clients somewhere in the age range of 50 to 75 are typically who we're seeing kind of, target or start the long-term care conversation. What I always say is from an ideal client perspective, what you want to look for is somebody who has a very high level of certainty that their retirement income needs are going to be met, right? So that's obviously step one in a financial plan is making sure you have the retirement income that you're going to need. What I always say is try to be as proactive about the long-term care conversation as possible because the problem with long-term care insurance is you have to be medically eligible to be able to apply for a plan. And so the earlier you make that decision or make a move towards getting some coverage, the more likely you are to be able to qualify from a medical perspective. And so I always say there's like an intersection of when it makes the most sense. It's kind of first when you're financially set from a retirement income perspective, and then obviously while you're still healthy enough, that's kind of the perfect time to have that conversation. And so exactly when that is for each individual, it's going to be a little bit different. But I typically say, 45 to 65 is the real sweet spot. If you can have the conversation there, is a great place to start.
Got it. Okay, so we've heard a lot about great things about this type of a policy already. What are the downsides? Like, what are the risks that we see or trade-offs that we do when we use a policy like this?
Yeah, when I talk about the downsides to these plans, I kind of look at it like the downside of any insurance plan, right? So it's one of those situations. If you don't have a claim, obviously the money that you're putting into a plan would likely do better elsewhere, right? So if you were just to invest your money, you're likely going to have more money than would pay out in the death benefit for a hybrid long-term care plan, right? And it's just kind of like the example I use is if you have homeowners insurance and your house doesn't burn down, wasn't the best deal, right? If you have homeowners insurance and your house burns down, it's the best spend of your money you possibly could have had, right? In that kind of analogy, though, again, 70% of people have a long-term care event, so the odds that you have some form of claim are pretty high. And so again, it's just a trade-off of, hey, Could I have had a little bit more over here? And when I pass away to my kids, if I don't have a long-term care event versus sheltering substantially more, should you have an event? Because again, with insurance, if you do have a claim, there's really no more efficient way to tackle that risk than insurance.
All right, so I think you touched on this briefly before, but I think it's important to go back to it one more time. Is it how, when you receive these benefits, how are they taxed when you get them?
Yeah, so again, the main component of this is the benefits, whether that be a long-term care benefit or the death benefit, they're going to pay out on a completely tax-free basis, right? And we get a lot of questions from clients like, why is that? In reality, the government looks at this as saying, hey, we're taking some risk off of us because they are the safety net for people who become financially insolvent due to a healthcare event. So people that put proactive measures in place get the added tax benefits of saying, hey, we have a policy. So those benefits that we pay out, even though there is a nice bit of leverage and growth on that, you don't pay a penny of state or federal taxes on any of the benefits, whether that be long-term care or death benefit.
Okay, real quick, of course, the compliance piece is that we know that this is not for everyone, and we really need to make sure that we talk through what's right about this, the tax ramifications, how it fits in your plan. That's very, very important. Now, last thing, what one action item, if you could just say, okay, here's where everyone should at least, or at least almost everyone in some way, shape, or form, here's an action item for everyone to do when it comes to hybrid long-term care insurance today.
Yeah, so I always say that there's two. So I'll double up on this a bit, but the first thing that I always suggest people do, if you go on Google and you Google Genworth cost of care, Genworth is the largest provider of traditional long-term care insurance, so they have the largest set of claims data. If you go on there and Google Genworth cost of care calculator, it'll be the top result on Google. You can search your city and state, and it shows you kind of right now what the cost for in-home care, what the cost for assisted living, what the cost for skilled nursing care is in your area. So I think when you're trying to develop a plan, understanding the risk is hugely important and kind of say, hey, how do we as a family want to tackle this potential exposure, right? So I think just understanding what it costs in your city and state makes a lot of sense as a first step. The second step is if you do think that insurance may or may not be a fit for you, we do have what's called a pre-qualification health checklist. And so that's something that Randy can provide for you if you reach out to him. But that lists out most of the underwriting red flags that might preclude somebody from getting coverage. And so I always think it's a good place to start just to say, hey, am I even eligible for long-term care insurance? If I am, great. Maybe it makes sense for me. Maybe it doesn't. If I'm not, then we need to formulate a different plan on how we could potentially self-fund or, protect against this risk and make sure our portfolios are protected. So I think that's the kind of two good places to start from a long-term care perspective.
Excellent. All right, we're going to wrap up. I think we're a little bit early, but I just want to wrap up. Thank you so much. This is just an incredibly important piece of anyone's financial plan, and I appreciate you giving us a little background on it today. And everyone have a wonderful day.
Awesome.